When we talk about neocolonialism, I always remember these words of the Zambian called Simon Kapwepwe. Kapwepwe said, this colonizer who has become a neocolonizer will one day come as a foreign investor.
What is the reality? I don't know any time in our history that the Chinese government overthrew an African government. I don't know of any instance in our history where Chinese assistance to Africa or any other country has been dependent on the people's choice of a type of government, and so on. That's the difference.
Welcome to Drive for Africa, the channel dedicated to unveiling the stories, voices, and visions of Africa's past, present, and future. In this compelling episode, we delve into a profound dialogue featuring some of the continent's most revered leaders, including the legendary Patrice Lumumba and the transformative figure Isaias Afwerki, among others. These visionary leaders come together to illuminate the enduring shadows of neocolonialism that still looms over Africa, dissecting its insidious impact on our nations and people. Let's begin.
We actually have been trying to develop the media, as part of our effort to tell the true African story. It's a story of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade. It's a story of classical colonialism, and today it's a story of neocolonial exploitation, disguised colonialism.
You talk about neocolonialism. If you read what is being said on some international media, that means China. They say China is trying to colonize Africa under disguise of economic cooperation. So what do you see as real neocolonialism?
We have to understand that we are discussing this within the context of an anti-Chinese hysteria.
Yes.
Which is deliberately fueled by Western government, Western intelligence agencies, and their media. There's a vigorous anti-Chinese hysteria. That's the backdrop. What is the reality? I don't know any time in our history that the Chinese government overthrew an African government. I don't know of any instance in our history where Chinese assistance to Africa or any other country has been dependent on the people's choice of a type of government, and so on. That's the difference. The West pretends to be giving us aid, but it's always conditioned on many things.
A continent that has allegedly the wealthiest resources of all the continents of the world is also the home of the poorest people on the globe. That disconnect is not a good disconnect, and we need to work to change that disconnect. So when we're then talking about the need for self-reliance, it is because particularly important is to recognize that we have the resources. We have the youngest population in the world. 25% of our population is under the age of, 19. It's a huge amount of resource, of potential strength. And once we do the educating, we find the means to do the educating of this population and giving it skills, then we are putting Africa on a path of very, very strong economic growth. We can replicate what has been done in Asia if, like them, we maintain the discipline and the correct analysis of what we need to do to move our continent forward. But really, if they've been able in Asia in a generation to transform the lives of hundreds of millions of Chinese, hundreds of millions of Indians, why can we not replicate that same phenomenon on our continent? We can do it. And I have no doubt that those of you here can make a big input into that transformation that we're all looking for. And when we're saying this, and it's very important that we recognize that we're not saying we're turning our back on the world. No, we can't do that. We live on the same planet. We need the association and the partnership with countries like France, with the technologies that they have developed here, their savoir-faire in many, many areas. All those things are matters that we can profitably associate and benefit from. But all of it, always, from an understanding that it is for us to define the relationship that we want with the rest of the world.
Let's get out of this cycle, first and foremost, okay? I would like to focus on my own issue. Now, people are talking about the resources of the continent, 60% of this endowment, 20% of this endowment. I mean, why can't you mobilize your own resources rather than extend your hands for handouts and charity? Is there a way of mobilizing these resources in the continent? How do you mobilize these resources? Can you mobilize the resources of Niger that are going to Europe, uranium and what have you? What about the mineral resources of this continent? Are you mobilizing these resources for the development of the continent, for climate change? What are these resources? Everybody is talking about their achievements in their own locality, in their own national borders, without even addressing the real issues challenging this continent. Talk about the continent's challenge and try to find solutions for this challenge, okay? We're talking about climate change, you're talking about resources, you are talking about so many things. Don't divert focus on non-issues, okay? Now, do your homework, come up with a definition of your goals and objectives, strategize, go for detailed plans, and then come to mobilize resources so that you implement your programs. Otherwise, I don't want to waste your time and waste my time talking about our achievements in Eritrea. Try to talk about some of the issues mentioned on this summit. These billions coming to this continent from anywhere, Europe, Americas, or any other place, you are inviting intervention in your own affairs. And this money coming from there, billions and billions, will be siphoned back there. Make sure that you mobilize your own resources so that you can be enabled to benefit from resources coming from outside. The promises of billions is no good. You're talking about corrupt governments and comparing them with the private sector and promoting the private sector, the private sector, the private sector. You put in place accountable governments, non-corrupt government that will use national resources for the development of the majority. This is not a matter of polarizing the private sector and the public sector. These classical arguments about the private sector, the public sector, that makes sense at all. It's out of context. We need to be focused on this matter. We can't blame governments and bring non-governmental organizations to manage our affairs. That is phenomenal. In Africa, go everywhere. Non-governmental governments, non-governmental organizations are managing governments and discrediting governments and replacing them with what they call private sector. Can you imagine this makes sense to anyone? Now talk about serious things, okay? You want to implement programs, articulate your goals and objectives in the first place, okay? Strategize on how you can achieve these goals and objectives. Then go for detailed plans, sectoral plans or industrial plans, and then mobilize resources for that. Give these plans and the resources to reliable hands, accountable hands.
This is why fighting colonialism and neocolonialism becomes very difficult. The neocolonizer has also recruited people within your ranks. They have trained your army. They have indoctrinated your army. So you fight and move 2 steps forward, but you are moved several steps backwards. And that is why the fight is not easy. The neocolonialist keeps on changing shape, keeps on recruiting people from within our ranks, and there is no shortage of people who want to be recruited for 30 pieces of silver. And that is why the fight is long, painful, and not easy to win. You know, when we talk about neocolonialism, I always remember these words of the Zambian called Simon Kapwepwe. Kapwepwe said, this colonizer who has become a neocolonizer will one day come as a foreign investor. And that is exactly what happened. So that apart from the French one, which is more vicious and more open, they don't even pretend. There are also other streams of neocolonialism, but the French one is the worst. Because the French never left. And where they were kicked out, as in Guinea they destroyed things, as in Algeria they destroyed things, as in Mali they destroyed things. But theirs is the more obvious and more vicious because they control all levers. They control not only your politics, they control your economics, they control your resources, they control your education. So their brand of neocolonialism is the most vicious. The other countries, such as the former colonies of Britain, what they did is that they leave you to run your politics. But even that they influence in some ways. But how do they now remain in your system? They remain in your system by controlling your economy in different areas. If you look at former British colonies, you'll discover they still control your agriculture. They control your pharmaceutical industry. Until very recently, they controlled your banking system. They control your intelligence. They still have their military bases. They train your army. So they appear to have gone, but they are not too far away. And of course, with the new entrance into the arena, such as the United States of America, they control you through different ways, like their cultural centers and NGOs. The NGOs are not innocent in this regard. These are Trojan horses. They continue to control your so-called civil society, so that you have a cadre of Africans who get money from non-governmental organizations, intelligent individuals, but their only claim to fame is that they write proposals and they write reports and they send them to whoever financed them. He or she who pays the piper calls the tune. And the funding is based on what is important to those countries. When it was human rights, they tell you, you deal with human rights, then we'll fund you. When it is multi-party democracies, they tell you, talk about multi-party democracy and we'll fund you. When it is climate change, they tell you, talk about climate change and we'll fund you. When it is LGBTQI, they tell you, talk about LGBTQI and we'll fund you. So that you see that there is always something. The neocolonialist is always hatching plots and getting our men and women, particularly those who are intellectually endowed, to engage in these activities because they know that if they control the scream of the society, then everybody will fall in place. Sometimes I imagine to myself the neocolonialists in the inner sanctum sitting down and say, we must not allow this to happen. Let us come and hatch another plot. And they're always hatching another plot. And we are always falling into the same environment through these plots. And we are always losing the battle. Even when we think we are winning, we are losing because they know what they are doing. And they are several years ahead of us in terms of planning. This is the problem. They are involved in research at all levels. And we are kept squeezed. As they said, as I always remember these words, iconic words of George Floyd when he was being killed and they stepped on his neck and says, I can't breathe. The African can't breathe because the knees of the neocolonialists are on his neck, on her neck. Can't breathe, is gasping for air. That is the state in which we are.